Hello again, everybody. My name is Mike Johnson with Data Recognition Corporation, and I'm glad to be here today to talk about TABE and TABE Class-E. We're happy to have this session hosted by IPDAY, but I'll go ahead and get started today. See the slides moving to the next slide. And just a reminder, if you have any questions, you can certainly put them in the Q&A. There's also the chat, and we'll use the chat a little bit later in the presentation. The session is in listen only mode, so you won't be able to ask a question. So again, use the chat or the Q&A buttons at the top of the screen. And then it is being recorded and will be posted on the IPDAY website in about a day or two from the recording today. Just as an overview of what we're going to cover today, we're going to look at TABE and TABE Class-E. And for those of you that don't know, TABE is for the adult ed side, TABE Class-E is for the ESOL side. We'll go through the changes for both of them, look at our workforce portal real quick, also talk about the next recommended test level indicators that we're implementing for TABE and TABE Class-E, and then review the reports, but also talk about some of the research aligning high school equivalency and grade ranges, and certainly answer any questions that do come up in the chat as well. As a first step, just to start out, I'd like to kind of get people's feedback. So you're certainly welcome to respond in the chat if you want to let me know one part of TABE that you use most often, and maybe that is a test administrator that's using the portal and scheduling tests. Maybe it's a teacher using the reports. Maybe it's just that it's the reading and math test in general. But if you want to let me know what your area most often used, and also one area that you wish you could change related to TABE as we go forward. And so it'd be just good to get the kind of the information related to the areas that people might have some challenges in. And we'll watch those as they come into the chat as well, and I'll make some comments related to those. So we see some teachers and a lot of people using the reading test, a couple of people using the reports as well. So we'll talk about that, and maybe some of these will be covered on the future slides coming up. And certainly a lot of the areas that people are using, we'll talk about how they are updated for 13 and 14. So really one thing to start off with is that the new versions of TABE have been federally approved. So TABE 13 and 14 has been federally approved. TABE Class-E also for the new version of C&D have been approved. Those approvals were received by DRC in late June. The process then after that starts the publishing process for the online test and the paper and pencil tests. And we will continue to support paper and pencil going forward. The process for that TABE Class-E was taken ahead to priority related to the publishing phase, because initially that expiration period was happening first, but the U.S. Department of Education extended all ESL assessments, so we're now on the same expiration, which is July of 2025 for that. Go to the next slide here. And so today we're still working with TABE 11 and 12. We're still working with TABE Class-E. Technically, those are forms A and B, and they'll be moving to forms C and D. And again, the deadline for those is June 30th of 2025. So for both anybody that's using TABE today, you want to make sure you have your post-testing done before June 30th of 2025. On July 1st, the only recordable scores will be for TABE 13 and 14, or TABE Class-E, C, and D going forward. I did check with the Department of Ed today, and TABE Class-E, C, and D can be used today. Again, it is available in the online format. It was released in September. TABE Class-E paper and pencil will be out in the middle of the spring, so late March, early April for that. For TABE 13 and 14, it is scheduled to be released on January 10th. The state board is meeting in January to approve that under the state Department of Ed policy. So we anticipate late January use for TABE 13 and 14. So I know there's programs in Florida that start in March for the new program year, enrolling and doing intake for students. So yeah, it will be ready ahead of that process when early spring comes around. So just know we're in the process of waiting for the next board meeting. The difference between TABE 11 and 12 going into 13, 14 and TABE Class-E going from AB to CD is that in the technical assistance documents from the Department of Education right now, the version numbers are listed for TABE, that being 11 and 12, but for Class-E, it does not specifically state 13, 14, or I mean, I'm sorry, AB or CD. So what the Department of Education is requesting approval from the state board is to change TABE to be just the word. So whatever versions are currently approved by the feds will be currently available for the state. So we won't have to go back and reapprove 14 and 15, let's say, down the road in the future. So they did that with Class-E. It does not have the version numbers in the technical assistance, and they're working to change that with the state board in early January. As I mentioned earlier, the formats of testing will not be changing. We'll still have online testing. We'll still have paper testing. There's still the ability to do remote testing if you have people that can't get into your facilities to do that. There is also still the ability to do offline testing. Typically, that's in correctional or rural areas that it involves the proctor taking a laptop to a classroom or a lab and connecting it to a local area network and then delivering the test and then going back out to an administrative area where they can get to the internet and transmit the score. So a little bit of a different use to computer-based testing than the straight online testing that we've offered for many years. So 13 and 14 has received its federal approval. It is in the publishing phases. The biggest change for TABE 13 and 14 is that there aren't a lot of changes. So the new college and career readiness standards that we used for TABE 11 remain unchanged from the national level, as do the new the NRS descriptors. Those are unchanged. So the foundation of what TABE is directed toward has not changed. We do have some small adjustments to the blueprints and to the skill areas, but it's not changing the foundation area of the test as a whole. So you will notice some changes, and we'll go through that. One area that is changing for paper and pencil programs is that the answer sheets will go back to a standard single answer sheet. Right now with TABE, there is an answer sheet for every level of the test, so 8 answer sheets, and it will go back to the way we used to do that with TABE 9 and 10 and having a single generic answer sheet. The big driver for that is that we're adjusting the types of questions that are being used, specifically those 2-point questions that are used in TABE level E, for example, in the reading test. There are 3 2-point questions. But on level A, there's 15 of those 2-point questions. That by design needs to have space on the answer sheet for all the bubbles needed for those 2-point questions. So a lot more real estate needed. If we go to a standard number of 5 or 6 2-point questions on every version of TABE, and they're always going to be in the same spot, then we can have a standard answer sheet. So we'll see that as a big improvement for paper and pencil programs that will not need to keep track of all the different inventory of the answer sheets. Also, as we go forward, we will be having a general reduction of the testing time. And a couple of things related to testing time. Certainly, that's an area that a lot of people have challenges with and that they would like to see changed. And the easy way to reduce testing time is to take away some of the questions. If we take away some of the questions, then we don't cover the standards as completely as needed to get the federal approval. So we certainly need to have a certain number of questions to cover the standards at the required levels to get the federal approval. But what we are changing for TABE 13 and 14 is to reduce the reading load for students. So that is the kind of a long way of saying that there'll be less reading, less time spent reading on the test. Not just the reading test, but also the math and the language test. So the questions themselves will be shorter. Not that there's less questions. So today on a reading test, it might be a 7 or 8 paragraph passage and then have 5 or 6 questions related to that passage. Going forward in TABE 13 and 14, that passage would get shortened maybe down to 5 or 6 paragraphs. And some of those paragraphs are 1-sentence paragraphs, but it's just less time spent reading the questions themselves. So we'll see a slide a little bit later related to the time, and we'll talk about times as well a little bit more. But just know that's the overall goal on all the questions on the test is to reduce the reading load for the students. When we look at those small changes that I mentioned on the previous slide, I'm using reading as the example. And this slide is a rough draft of a blueprint. This will turn in to the more expanded blueprints that you're used to seeing on our website with the pie charts and the breakout of each section of the pie chart. But this is just a high level overview. In the red circle, you'll notice that the darker shaded column is TABE 11 and 12. The lighter shaded column is TABE 13 and 14. That skill area or that domain area of integration of knowledge and ideas has gone down about 1.5% or so from the coverage that it is in TABE 11 and 12. But if we look in the yellow circle right next door, the coverage has gone up about 1.5%. So a small skill area within integration of knowledge and ideas has transferred over. And typically that's done after the research scientists have reviewed the data from TABE 11 and 12 and found maybe the majority of candidates are always getting that a specific question wrong on level E, and it's probably a better question for level M, so they can move that over. It's not adjusting that we're no longer covering integration of knowledge and ideas. We still do. We just have maybe a little adjustment in the skill areas. You'll also notice on the slide on the left side, the green shaded area for vocabulary acquisition and use. This is an area that was traditionally under TABE 11 and 12 covered on the language test, and now it moves over to the reading test. So a little bit more of an alignment to what we see specifically to the GED, and having reading language arts is more of a curriculum area. Under the federal program, reading, math, and language are still the NRS reportable areas. So TABE continues to have reading, math, and language as the assessment areas. For Florida, most programs use just reading and math. So just know that this vocabulary acquisition and use will come back in and maybe better fit for the GED prep programs as well. Another change for TABE 13 and 14 on the math test is the transition to the Desmos calculators. If you're familiar with Desmos, you've probably done some work in the K-12 areas. Desmos is a technology that's been used for many years in K-12 and other assessment areas. And what Desmos is the technology organization that creates calculators for computer-based testing. So you'll see on the left side the standard 4-function calculator, on the right side a standard scientific calculator, and that's what we'll be using for TABE. Desmos as an organization has the ability to customize these calculators if a program needs to. So I use it typically for an example, the state of Georgia. The state of Georgia's K-12 system uses DRC's testing engine for their state summative testing. In there's calculators. Well, the calculator can have the Georgia State logo on it if they choose to. Or the curriculum teams within the state of Georgia could decide that they need to change the function keys on the scientific calculator, and Desmos can accommodate that. We are not doing any of that for TABE. We're staying with the generic Desmos 4-function calculator and the generic scientific calculator. The big change in this transition is that teachers will now be able to go to desmos.com and find a lot of resources related to calculators. So more classroom exercises, more teaching tools related to the use of calculators on assessments. So it's more about making it accessible for teachers to have more tools. Internally for DRC, TABE is the only assessment that doesn't use Desmos as a foundation, so it's a little bit easier internally that now we're all supporting the same calculator from our development teams. Level M will continue to be the 4-function calculator. Levels D and A will continue to use the scientific calculator. The only change on that is level A becomes all calculator allowed. So they'll be able to access the calculator for all sections of the math test going forward for level A. Couple of the other changes you'll notice on this chart, the left-hand side is TABE 11 and 12, the right-hand side is TABE 13 and 14. So again, these are the blueprint areas, the domains of number and operation in fractions and number and operation of base 10. They turn in and get recategorized as just number and operation, so kind of a larger heading group. You'll also notice that the headings on the right-hand side, number and operation, algebraic concepts, geometry, and measurement and data, also will become a platform or standardization of the domain areas. So As I change the slide, you'll see the level D blueprint, and on the left side, there's many domains today for 11 and 12, but going forward for level D, there's those same 4 domains: number and operation, algebraic concepts, geometry, measurement, and data. So again, we'll see a standardization of the domains, and this better aligns to the NRS descriptors. They have 4 main domain areas, and it's also many of our curriculum partners that align to the standards have this more generic kind of grouping area. Now the question is are we cutting away anything? And the answer is no. There are no standards going away on the test. So on the left-hand side, we see functions, expressions, geometry, statistics, ratios, and then the very last one is the number system. We don't see the number system on the right-hand side, but if I dig into the details a little bit more, I can pull up the structure of this for math. And there we see the number system in the middle of the screen, still under level D, but now classified under the heading of number and operation. So it does not go away. It's now just classified under the larger heading of number and operation. Same thing if we look at expressions and equations. It's now under algebraic concept. If I go backwards a slide, it was under its own domain area on the left-hand side. Now it gets reclassified under the algebraic concept side as well. So again, no changes in the domains themselves, just a little bit of the headings are changing to be more standardized. So we'll see those 4 main domains continue across all the math tests. And again, as I mentioned earlier, all of these rough domain charts will be turning into the more fuller, complete blueprints that are published to our website as well. Using language is another example, and again, I know a lot of Florida programs don't always use the language test, but just an example of the breakout. In the darker shaded columns are table 11 and 12, and the lighter shaded columns are 13 and 14. And what you'll notice is a more of a equal distribution across the objective areas. So today, convention of standard English was 48% of the level E test. It goes down to 33% because all those areas become 33%. And we see vocabulary acquisition and use that was on the language test now goes away, and because we talked about that earlier, moving over to the reading test. So all this is demonstrating is just more of an equal distribution of the domains across each level of TABE. So again, not changing the standards, but just equalizing the coverage of the domains across the levels of TABE. So as a follow-up, I want to we'll come back to TABE a little bit more, but I want to talk a little bit about our ESOL programs. And one question I wanted to ask of the attendees right now is what's the most beneficial instruction area for ESOL? So a lot of programs test just reading and listening in ESOL, but on the instruction side, we might be teaching towards writing or speaking, listening or reading. So I'm just wondering from the ESOL programs, if you want to put in the chat, what's the most beneficial you think to your students from the ESOL instructional side? And then also a second question of how many students typically move on a percentage basis from your program from ESOL to the GED track as well. So just if you want to drop those into the chat as well, that would be greatly appreciated. And I'll kind of pay attention to that as that goes forward. But I want to talk a little bit about TABE Class-E, and then we'll come back to some other TABE sections as well. So when we talk about TABE Class-E, if you're not familiar with it, it's been around since about 2007 and approved for use in Florida for most of that time, and will continue to be approved in Florida. In Florida, only the reading and listening sections are required for score tracking, but TABE Class-E does contain reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So there are 4 domains that can be used within the test. TABE Class-E is very similar to TABE from a layout perspective. There are 4 levels of proficiency, levels 1, 2, 3, and 4, just like you're used to in TABE of EMD&A. There is also 2 forms, just like you're used to 11 and 12 or 13 and 14. C and D is the most current versions of Class-E, and they are available. So if anybody is using TABE online today, it is very easy for us to turn on TABE Class-E. It's the exact same portal using the exact same screens that are used in the TABE 11 and 12 online system. TABE Class-E also uses the locator, so very similar to the TABE locator. Candidates initially take a locator test and get placed into it. We have the ability to use the auto locator on the computer-based test for that. There are also staff development pieces by DRC, and on the IPDA website, there's more staff development webinars as well related to Class-E. So specifically to some of the current changes and standards, as we mentioned, it is federally approved. We don't have to wait it for any additional board approval in Florida. Form C and D can be used by local programs. And one change that is important related to TABE is that there are new standards for adult ESL training or instruction. There are also new NRS descriptors. The benefit for TABE Class-E is that we were already very well aligned to the new changes, so there are not big changes needed for TABE Class-E going from the old standards to the new standards. So we'll see that as we go forward a little bit. But we have updated the items. Some of the questions will carry over from A and B to C and D. Some of them will be brand new, and some of them will be refreshed items. One of the ones that I use as an example is on our speaking test. There's a question about identifying the number on a check. So the amount of the check is $75, and the students are asked to identify the number or the amount of the check. Well, not many people are using checks today, and not many ESOL students are using checks as even a lesser percentage. So that scenario of the question is not very relevant today anymore, but the skill of identifying numbers is still a valid skill. So we are continuing to cover that. We'll just do it with a different question that addresses numbers and identifying numbers. The other area that we are working on is with our ESL publishing partners like Burlington or English Discovery or Cambridge, is to incorporate the Class-E scores directly into those curriculum systems that are using online learning pathway. We do this with TABE today with Essential Education or Aztec. We can send your TABE scores over to Essential Ed or to Aztec so that they can incorporate them into their systems and automatically assign lessons based on their TABE deficiencies. And we want to do that with our ESOL publishing partners. We've started that process with Burlington and Cambridge. Today, you can go into Burlington and assign lessons related on the TABE objectives, but we want to get down a little bit more detail in the skill area. So we're going to be working with them as we go into this new process for TABE C and D for Class-E to improve that data transfer process and hopefully be able to automate that a little bit in the near future. As I mentioned, not much is changing for TABE Class-E from the objective standpoint. On the left-hand side, we have the CD. I'm sorry, the left-hand side is the A and B, the right-hand side is the C and D. And the only big change in the test is how we address quantitative literacy. On the current forms for A and B, it was its own domain. You'll see that in the red box on the left side. Under the new English language proficiency standards from the Department of Education, that domain of quantitative literacy is a little bit de-emphasized. So that de-emphasizing now just becomes a subdomain. All that means is there's a few less questions related to numeracy terms. So you'll notice on the right-hand side, it no longer is its main domain, it comes as a subdomain. Now, quantitative literacy is covered on every section, reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So it becomes a subdomain on every, I have the reading as an example on the screen, but just know it follows the same change on all content areas. As I mentioned, also the blueprints are available at tabetest.com. So if you want to see these blueprints in more detail, they have the breakout at the bottom of the screen on the emphasis level for this happens to be the level 2 reading blueprint. And you can see within read words, what are the skill areas being assessed. We are also working on more of a crosswalk directly to the ELP standards. That's going to help the curriculum partners as well. Just a couple of quick sample questions. I won't go too far into this. These are posted on our tabetest.com website. You can go and take the online tools training and take these in the actual live environment of the test. But just know that the outside of the window is the exact same as we're used to seeing with TABE. So if you have students that are transitioning from ESOL into GED or adult ed, they're seeing the exact same interface, just different questions. So we have the toolbar at the top with the highlighter and the post-it note and the line guide. This one happens to be a reading sample question where they're identifying what's on the screen. A lower level question is a picture prompt. Higher level, they'll be reading a passage for that reading test. In the writing test, the writing is two parts. There's a multiple choice part that's pretty standard, and then a constructed response portion where they're typing in a response. Again, if this was the paper and pencil test, they would write in a writing folio the response in that area as well. On this writing response, this is scored locally with an educator scoring rubric in a portal right in the DRC system. So your staff will go into the system and score it based on a rubric. There is the ability for DRC to do that scoring, but it does have an additional fee for it. So there is a no-cost option to score that directly in the portal for this, and the rubric is provided right in the scoring module, or DRC can do that scoring as well for those programs that might use writing and speaking. So speaking is also constructed response. It's a little shaded out at the bottom, but they have a record button. The candidates are wearing a headset. They speak right into the computer, and then that passage is saved. It is not scored by AI or anything. It is just saved for the educator to come back in and score that. It is scored anonymously, so you do not know who the student is. It's not coded with their name on it. So you're just scoring it anonymously for that based on the rubric for that question. If anybody's interested in pilot testing, we did a pilot with Miami-Dade schools, and certainly we're happy to do any additional pilots if anybody wants to try out TABE Class-E that hasn't yet. Many programs have done part of our field testing, and the Miami-Dade Sunset School did some pilot testing, and they also tested their students because they were comparing it with CASAS. So they have some feedback that they've provided to us. This is the feedback from their testing proctors and teachers that were in part of the pilot program, just noticing better alignment to the GED transitioning students, certainly a shorter test, and we'll talk about the testing times, so less time spent on the test for that as well. But if you have any feedback or any questions, I'm certainly can get you in touch with the Miami-Dade people that did the pilot. Their one kind of area that they're working on is better alignment to their own curriculum. So they use Burlington, but they also have some internally developed curriculum. And so they want to do some more curriculum alignment work with Class E and the curriculum that they use specifically. So kind of switching back to TABE and Class-E in general and looking at the reports and what's available for reporting, what's changing for reporting. Most often people are using the individual profile report, and that will continue. We'll talk a little bit about some updates to the individual profile. Many people have some challenges about the turnaround time for reports. So we'll discuss that a little bit as we go into the system as well. But also there are individual portfolio reports. There are locator reports. There's also an on-demand roster report. That's a big request too, that many teachers are asking for class reports. The on-demand roster can function as a class report. One point about the on-demand roster is that it is a roster of everybody in a test session. So if you register students into a test session in the TABE online system as a class, then that test roster report turns into a class report. A lot of programs might use the intake process and test many groups of students in one test session and then divide them out into smaller classes. And if you do that, then you might want to look at the on-demand extract. The on-demand extract allows you to take your data out in an Excel spreadsheet, and in that way you can sort it out into class reports as well if you need to. So just know that there are options to get class data, whether it's the on-demand roster or the on-demand extract. We also have a nightly extract option. This is the same file that we send to Essential Ed or Aztec. It includes all the testing data and all the domain proficiency areas so they can assign lessons. We can send this same file to local programs. We do that for several programs in Florida that have their own local database, and we can send it on a nightly basis, and it gets uploaded directly into the local system, so there's no hand entering of TABE scores. It all happens overnight in a transfer process for that. So that's certainly available as well. Looking specifically at the individual profile, again, that's one that is used most often. The layout of the individual profile will pretty much be the same. We will see a little bit of a change on the far right-hand side. We have that measurable skills gain column. There is going to be a new column added that will be the next recommended test level, and we'll talk a little bit about that on another slide coming up as well. But just know that we're kind of making the far left-hand side a little bit skinnier, and making room for a new column that will show the next recommended level. So this person, as an example, on the reading test, they took level M, they did very well, they got a score very high. Their next test needs to be a level D test to show any NRS improvement or measurable skills gain. So the next recommended column will show level D in there. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward on that as well. At the bottom of the report, we won't see many changes there, but the left side of the bottom of the report will change with those more standardized domain headers. So remember, we still have at the bottom of this report number and operation of fractions, the number and operation of base 10, but that will go down to be just number and operation, and the total number of items and the points will be combined for that area. So just know that that will change to be matching to the new objective blueprints that we saw earlier. The second page of the report, again, will not change except for the domain heading areas and the names of those domains. But the skill areas will continue to be used, and we can, again, send this in an Excel spreadsheet on a nightly basis if programs need this. This is what we're looking to exchange data with on the Burlington English side for ESOL students, but we do currently do that with TABE as well. When we look at the reports in general, these are all PDF reports for the individual reports from our TABE portal. Many people, want to get a score very quickly. I'm going to go backwards real quick just to our list of reports. The on-demand extract, which is the local option, you can pull that out in Excel format. Those scores are available immediately after a student finishes a test. So just know that scoring of TABE tests and TABE Class-E tests happens immediately. The reporting and the populating into the PDF templates is what takes a little bit of time. That time should be roughly 5 to 7 minutes on average, but no more than 15 minutes. If you're seeing it takes longer than 15 minutes for a report, there's a good chance that you might just be clicking on that PDF icon and repeatedly, and you do need to go back and run that report if it's not available the first time. You just can't refresh it. And I'm happy to discuss that a little bit more with people separately. If you're having slow report issues, my information will be at the end of this slide presentation, so I'm happy to discuss that. But just know that reports should not be taking more than 15 minutes, and on average, they're about 5 to 7 minutes for the turnaround time for that. There's also a question that I just saw pop up in the chat about the auto locator, and that is being updated for 13 and 14 and for Class-E, that all locator scores will be now in the extract files. So the auto locator for both TABE and TABE Class-E will get added to all reporting. So you will see, even though it's the same report, it will be added to the system for 13 and 14 and for Class-E, C, and D. So you will see the auto locator as well as the standalone locator. Just to look real quick at the Class-E student report, this is a sample of what the report looks at like today with forms A and B, and we give you all the score breakdowns on the bottom, including the grammar, the meaning, the appropriateness under the speaking category. This report is going to be changed to kind of clean this view up in the top section, but the second page does include all the domain areas as well. So I'm going to go back to that previous slide. So we no longer report total reading and writing and total listening and speaking. They are technically federally approved, but no states use them any longer. So we're going to suppress those on the report, and we're going to suppress the grammar, meaning, and appropriateness because they're not reportable scores. So the top section will just be reading, listening, writing, and speaking, and you'll see those scores. You'll also notice a mark out there on the NRS level. That will be a new mark. So we'll have, it's actually been turned into an asterisk, both for TABE and TABE Class-E. We are not going to be using the plus and minus signs any longer. We are going to change those to asterisks, and they're going to be reported on the NRS level, so you won't have any confusion about in range or out of range or reportable or not reportable. If there's a score in the scale score column, that is a valid score and it is a reportable score. The asterisk will be added to the NRS column just to indicate that that's the highest level of federal reporting that can be obtained for that area. We're also working with Florida Department of Ed to update some of the reporting requirements for adult ed and adult GED. Right now, you have to be an NRS level 5 to get into the GED classifications. We've provided research and documentation to the Department of Ed that shows NRS level 4 is a valid entry area for that. So we're anticipating that getting updated from the Department of Ed into the new technical assistance paper early in January as well. And when they update it for TABE Class-E, we're looking for that update to happen. We're also looking to update the grade ranges that they use for the CTE program. So you'll see that update happening as well. We've provided that research to the staff at the Department of Ed to update kind of what are the cut scores going into some of those CTE programs that use TABE as an entrance score for that as well. I mentioned earlier that next recommended test area, and this is the chart, and many programs have a similar chart. We've just kind of formatted it a little bit more with the TABE colors and the purple, but I'm going to focus on the top left corner. If we have a candidate that comes in and takes a TABE test and they are assigned level E by the locator, they take the level E test and they get a score of 450. That's in that middle range, that's NRS level 2. Their post test would then also be a level E test because they still have room to grow on level E. But another student that came in and took the locator and get a scale score on the level E test of 550, now they're at NRS level 3, and that is the highest possible score. So over on the right-hand side of that chart, they need to move up to the level M test to be able to show some gain for that. And as I mentioned, this suggested next test level will be added to the individual student report. This chart itself will be posted to our tabetest.com website in the near future. If you need it ahead of time, I'm happy to send it to you. So you'll have my information at the end, and it will also be on the IP Day slides that they have on their website as well. When we look at TABE and high school equivalency, as I mentioned, we've done some research to have students that took TABE and went on to take their high school equivalency. And those scores and those alignments are what we've provided to the Department of Ed to show the justification that NRS level 4 students are succeeding at the GED test. So that technical assistance paper right now that has only NRS level 5 and above, we're anticipating that getting changed in early next year to include NRS level 4 as well for that process. Somebody asked a question I just saw pop up in the chat where the blueprints are. The 13-14 blueprints will be posted a little bit later this fall to tabetest.com, and you'll see more announcements about that when it does happen. But related to the research, what we have for research is that generally a student getting a 536 on the reading test for TABE has a strong likelihood of passing the GED test at that minimum threshold of 145. So many people have seen this, and again, I can get a 536 on NRS level 4 of the test and doing very well on TABE level M. So a candidate that takes a level M test and does very well, they can get a score of 536 and then be able to do take the GED test and pass at a minimum level. Passing at a minimum level and getting that 145 is a great accomplishment for the students, but it might not always prepare them for their next steps. And obviously, the GED themselves have second and third level cut scores. They're college ready and they're college ready plus credit scores. So if you have a student that's going into a post-secondary program or a CTE program, they might need more than the minimum qualifications for that. So that is something that is available. Many people ask, why is TABE so much more rigorous than the GED test? Well, if you want to get a score of 175 or above on the GED test, you're going to need the content that's at level A of the TABE test. Do I need level A of TABE to minimally pass? No, But if I want to have a student that wants to, is in one of those programs that will accept a GED high passing score for college credit, they certainly are going to need exposure at the level A side of TABE for that. So 536 for the reading is the minimum cut score, 537 for math. This chart in this white paper is posted already to our tabetest.com website under the resource tab. These scale scores are related to TABE 11 and 12 and TABE 13 and 14. The scale scores ranges do not change between the tests. So that's an important point as we transition to 13 and 14. Any cut points you have today that you're using will carry over. That's part of the research that the research scientists can do, is to align the scale to the content itself. So again, no changes in the numbers of the cut scores for that going into that. So if you're using 536 to get into a program, or you're using another score, that will carry over as well for that. Another area of research is to align TABE to some grade alignment data. And many people, have certainly are veterans of TABE, and they go back to the TABE 910 days that use grade equivalents and have a math score, for example, of 9.2. And so in practice, that 9.2 means ninth grade second month. Most of us in ninth grade second month were brand new freshmen into a high school. We're not sure what we're doing in math class. So your recollection of what was happening in the second month of school is probably not too good. I went to high school in Wisconsin in the middle 80s. If you don't know what the standards were in Wisconsin in the middle 80s, don't know my understanding of ninth grade math. I will say that it's Algebra 1. My son went to a high school where his freshman math class was geometry, because he took algebra in eighth grade. So his perception of a grade range is different. And we don't have a national standard, again, for good and bad, on the Common Core side of things, that would have allowed us to have a national definition of that. And whether it's good or bad, I'm not going to say that, but just, that if we talk about my high school in Wisconsin and somebody else's high school in Florida, they're different. And there's not really a lot of commonalities to that, except to say it's Algebra 1 maybe. Going forward, standards always keep changing. Florida has the college and career readiness standard, or the best standards. So those are different than other states. What we have tried to do with TABE is to align that to the data that we can use as a common national normative sample. And one of our research projects that we did was to create our TABE workforce portal. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end here. But the workforce portal is an add-on that aligns TABE scores to the careers on the ONET database from the Department of Labor. And we've done a couple of IPDA webinars related to the workforce portal, so there are recordings for that as well. But the workforce portal also provided additional research. This workforce portal was done in conjunction with Metametrics, which is a research company from North Carolina that created Lexile and Quantile scores. Lexile are reading scores, Quantiles are math scores. So they Lexile students' reading ability, and they also Lexile the readability of the content that they're reading. So the easy example is library books are Lexiled. Textbooks are Lexiled, so that we know what the readability of the material is, but also the reading ability of the student that is interacting. Same thing with math on a quantile scale. When we did our workforce portal, we did it in conjunction with Metametrics and the U.S. Department of Labor's Job Corps. So the Job Corps sites around the country all use Lexiles and Quantiles quite heavily in their curriculum planning and lesson planning. So they wanted to know what was the reading and math levels of these top jobs on the ONET database. So Metametrics went through and Lexiled and Quantiled the reading and math requirements of over 950 jobs on the ONET database. We took the Lexile questions and the Quantile questions and put them into TABE in the fall of 2022. You didn't notice it happened, but we changed the unscored questions on TABE to be the Lexile and Quantile questions, and that allowed us to collect the data to align TABE scores to Lexiles and Quantiles. So if Metametrics has what the job is for a Lexile and Quantile, and we have what the TABE score is for a Lexile and Quantile, we can put all that together and come up with a workforce portal. So that's a great tool, and we can talk separately about the workforce portal that will assign what your students' TABE scores are to careers. But the side benefit of that was that Metametrics has 30 plus contracts around the country with states that do K-12 testing. So they have a very good normative sample of what's happening around the country. So they have a good sample of what the average third graders are doing, the fifth graders, the eighth graders, the 12th graders. So if we know what the TABE and the Lexile score match, and they know what the normative data is, then we can create more of a grade range alignment for that. So we put together this chart, and again, it's not as pretty as the next recommended chart level. So this chart is not posted yet to the website. It still needs to get some marketing formatting done for this. But we see that this aligns grade ranges. So we don't see that 9.2 anymore. We just see ninth grade or eighth grade. But what we see from the previous slide is the 536 for high school equivalency is somewhere in that eighth to ninth grade range. If you have a local employer or if you're working with a career source location next to you and they want to find people that are reading at the ninth or 10th grade level, well, that's the upper end of the 500 scale of TABE. So do I need to use level M for that? Do I need to use level D for that? Well, that depends on what the job requirements are. And maybe that employer or that workforce program could benefit from looking at the TABE blueprints to see what's the standards and what's the skills being covered on level M to get a very good score to qualify for that 500 or upper 500 range, or what's the level D skills that somebody might be able to get a 550 or above on as well. So we're not posting the exact score, we're showing you the ranges that fit into those areas. On a more common adult ed area, if you have an average high schooler take the GED test on the first day of high school, there's a good chance that they might pass at a minimum threshold. They're not reading at the 12th grade level, but they can get that 536 on the TABE test. That would mean that they have a likelihood of minimally passing that GED test. But if you gave that same test to the same person 4 years later in 12th grade, they would likely perform better and they'd likely be better prepared for that next step, going into a post-secondary or going into a career program or even going into a CTE area as well. So these ranges can be used to help align people's common perceptions of grade ranges into what a TABE score might represent to that as well. I'm going to jump over to our public website real quick just to point a little bit of this information out. So if I go under the resource tab, you'll notice there's a TABE 11 and 12, a TABE Class-E AB, and a TABE Class-CD. Very shortly, you'll see a TABE 13-14 link be added as well with all the information related to that. But there are other links that are available. That high school equivalency one is right here that I talked about for the GED. I'll just go to that one real quick. That has the same chart that we looked at on the slides. That's under our resource tab by itself as research. There's also the online tools training. If you want to take a sample test, there are at the bottom of the screen, you can take TABE 11 and 12 or A and B of Class-E, and then there's a separate link for C and D of Class-E. So these are the online system in a non-password protected environment that lets you go in and take those tests as well for that. When we go back up to our resource tab, and I go into TABE 11 and 12 today, and I go over to the scoring and reporting section and look at our best practice page. This is the area that I wanted to review the scores. You know, if we look at that upper 500 score when we were trying to get to our maybe our 9th or 10th grade level, remember I can go up to a 575 on level M. That's getting every question correct. But I'm getting easier questions correct. I'm not exposed to the content that might align to level 5 of the NRS. So, you know, if you're trying to work with a local employer and say, I need to get a candidate that has a score of 570 because that aligned to a grade range that I was looking at, I have some options on where that 570 can come from and what content that person might be exposed to. So, you know, they might want to look at the reading requirements of that job. Are they working with more advanced math skills? And they could look at the math areas as well. So just know on our public website of tabetest.com, that information is available and you'll be able to download that as well. Just to jump over to our portal itself, this portal will not be changing much between TABE 11 and 12 and TABE 13 and 14. One area that is changing, and I'm going to log into the portal here real quick, is under the applications tab when we go into test management. And again, this is where most people go that are using the online system. When you go into manage test sessions, and some of you have seen this already, this first box on the top left corner has been pre-filled in, but will be changing now. You'll notice that I can go into my C&D section. I could go into my TABE, which is really TABE 11 and 12, or I can go into the new 13 and 14. If you were to go into 13 and 14, there's nothing there yet, but the header is there. So this is the big change from the operation side of test management, is that I will go into a new section of the portal when I'm using the online system, whether it's C&D for ESOL, whether it's 13 and 14. All the other functions are the same. I just have to be in the right section of the portal. Think of this as your online banking. You might have a joint account with your spouse, and you might have a separate account for fun things that you want to do in your life. And I go into, I'm still in Bank of America or in Chase or whatever bank we're with, but I'm going into different sections of that account. So think of that way for 13 and 14 and Class E. By breaking this apart, we get rid of all that historical TABE 9 and 10 data that you have seen in your account for many years, and all those old test sessions that you see. They will remain in the TABE section of the portal, but you're going to start fresh with new test sessions in the TABE 13 and 14 section. This will improve the turnaround time of reports as well, so you'll see that happen very, very smoothly going forward. For those programs that are interested in the workforce portal, it is an add-on piece for TABE, but it is right inside the portal itself up in the top right corner. So any TABE program can add this to their system. I'll just show you a quick example. I know we're getting short on time, but I want to just jump into the workforce portal real quick. I'm going to look at my school #1 site, and I'm going to pull up my TABE data. And I'm working with a student named John. He is looking to go into the utility business and work for the utility company. He said they have good benefits. So John Weiss is on page 2 of my report. I can click on John's name, sit down with him in a consultative approach and say, what kind of career do you want to go into? And he says, again, I want to work for the electricity company. So I'm going to search for that career cluster from the 16 career clusters from the Department of Labor. I can go ahead and find architecture and construction, and then that career is listed under electrical power line installer and repairer. And now I'll go ahead and search on that career. It will pull up the job description. So we see high school diploma, using and installing repair cables and power distribution systems. But more importantly, in the middle of the page, the job has been lexiled and quantiled and aligned to a 547 on TABE and a 564 for math. But John's TABE scores are in purple. He's far away from being ready from that. And again, remember, high school equivalency is a 536. So this job technically is above the minimum requirements. And so we might see other careers that candidates want to go into. And this is a great visual tool to say, yes, you want to go into this career area, but there are some educational requirements to make you successful in that career area. We also have the salary information for that job, the tasks that they would do on that job on a daily basis, and other careers that align to those similar tasks. So maybe John doesn't want to climb the tall power poles, but we can keep our feet on the ground and be an electrician and go into that career area and see. Now those TABEs, the job scores went up a little bit more, so a little bit higher reading in the electrician field. But I can show John this. I can show John the high school equivalency research and say, we don't necessarily need to get to that second level for college ready for the GED, but we want to get a little bit higher in this area. So again, that's the workforce portal. That is an add-on piece. It's $5 per year per student. There are some programs in Florida that do use that, but we can certainly add that for any program that's interested in working with the career students as well. The last slide I have is just my contact information. Again, I will share these slides. They will get posted on the IPDAY website, but if you want to drop me an email, I'm certainly happy to send them to you quicker. Your local representative is Christine Kirk. She's in the Jacksonville area. She had a scheduling conflict for today. She covers also Louisiana and Mississippi, so she was working there. But you can always contact her for some local questions. She's happy to visit. I have also included the 866 number on the screen. That is our tech support number. You have free access to tech support for any online questions or scanning questions. So you can always contact them with any tech support questions that you might have as you go forward to that. And then the public website of tabetest.com. As we jump into the feedback area, I do want to mention for the IPDAY folks that there is another IPDAY webinar coming up on November 19th. I encourage you, it's one of the Tech Tuesday webinars. So it's titled Using ThinkLink to Improve Learning. So again, that's November 19th. If you haven't signed up for that, you can go to the IPDAY website. And there's a quick survey on the screen now. If you would take that survey for the IPDAY folks, that would be helpful to go through all of those, just a few quick questions related to that, and it would be helpful for the information that we will use to improve these webinars in the future. If you do have any additional questions, I'm going to review the Q&A as we end here, but I want to thank you for attending today and look forward to meeting you either at an ACE function or locally. I know I was in Miami-Dade yesterday at their professional development meeting, but look forward to meeting you in the future. But thank you very much and hope you have a good rest of the week.